Put the record. Wonderful. Well, I'll go ahead and introduce myself and kind of explain what we'll do here this evening, and then Denton will have you explain and introduce yourself. First of all, hello. My name is Amanda Smith. My sign name is this. I am a community specialist for DCSC, Deaf Community Support Center, located in Minnesota. I use she/her pronouns. I am currently wearing a dark gray long-sleeved shirt with a lime green outline of a person's face, showing a kiss fist sign on my chest. I'm wearing a gold Apple Watch. I have brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, gray eyes, and I am a white person. Denton.
Well, hello. My name is Denton Mallas. I was a student at Alabama School for the Deaf. I have been teaching for the past 7 years for social studies, and also I have been coaching a couple different sports. So a visual description of myself, I am a white male with sometimes have glasses on, yes. I have a green shirt, green t-shirt. I also have on a gold ring. My background, I'm using the blur background feature right now.
Wonderful. This is Amanda. So I'll go ahead and ask you, Denton, if any of our guests don't know who you are, tell us who you are, what your growing up was like.
All right. So I was born and raised in Wisconsin. Went to a public school, mainstreamed, and then from there I transitioned to Wisconsin School for the Deaf. I graduated there in 2009, and from there I went on to Gallaudet University, and I really wanted to pursue my bachelor's degree in history. Then, when I completed that, I pursued my master's school, went on to get my master's degree, and started teaching at the School for the Deaf. That's really been what I've been doing up until now. But I am such an avid fan of sports. That's really why I even got into this whole school realm, honestly.
Well, that's wonderful. And I don't know if you know, but I'm involved with the Minnesota State Academy for the Deaf. And so, Denton, you and I will have to talk sports. You graduated in 2009, and I am very close behind you, so it's wonderful to connect and see you again.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about your daily routine and life before the pandemic for you? What did an average day look like?
Prior to the pandemic, my routine, what did it look like? All right. Well, it looked a lot like when students were in school, all the students would come into school. I would stand in the hallway, and each time a student, before they got into my class, I would always greet them, say hi, shake hands, give them a fist bump, anything just to kind of make that connection with the student before they go into my class. Then when the students were in class, always on Mondays, I always make sure I checked in first. So the check-in could look like just asking, what did they do over the weekend? Or just some small talk. It would last for about 5, maybe 10 minutes, just to kind of get into class until we get into the instruction. Then I would host my class. Throughout the class, often what I would do is I would change up a lot of the routine, and my blocks would change also. So I may have class for about 75 minutes each. So when I would have those classes, probably about 20, 30 minutes of that time is me supporting the students, and then the rest would be time for the lesson. Now, during the lesson, I would typically use Google Classroom. So that was my primary teaching platform at that time. That's where it was easy just to house all my documents. Everything related to class was easy to be able to be onto that one platform because, at today's age, we are getting more and more into technology, and writing pen and paper is not too prevalent anymore. And also, it's good not to be able to steal people's homework. That's another thing.
Wow. So, when you have proof of homework, whether you done it or not, I think that's that digital thing, right?
Hey, hey, I haven't gotten that excuse just yet, but hopefully they won't come up with no new ones.
All right. Well, hopefully they won't learn from me.
And if they do, I know just who to go to because you don't get.
Well, after school, what would your typical day, evening look like?
So typically after school, it would be coaching. So it would go when school is over, clean up the classroom a bit, and then I would start coaching. I would coach basketball, I would coach cheerleading, and then also I would coach in the academic bowl. As I was involved into all that typically would end around 5 or 6 p.m. Then I would get home just to be able to finally just relax and let go. I would read, I would play games, that sort of thing.
Wow. Sounds like a pretty great life to just live here every day. So I wonder if you could tell me, when was the first time you heard about COVID? Was that on the news? Was it through family or friends? How did you find out COVID was happening?
COVID. When I first noticed or learned about COVID, it had to be about December of 21. So what happened, how I found out, is typically, as everyone, we would use Twitter. Now, now it's known as X.
Yeah.
right? But typically, I would get all my information using then formerly Twitter just to get any updates. So when news would pop up on there, that's how I would get that information also. So this day specifically, I looked on Twitter and I seen so much discussion and dialogue and all this concern going about this virus that is spreading. So that's really when I found out first around about COVID. We haven't talked about it in schools up until that point yet. So it would the world hasn't really gotten out. So it had yet to become a pandemic, but students were starting to talk about and have some concerns concerning COVID itself. So we was always looking out on the news outlets to see what's the latest information related to that.
So, what was your first thought when you learned about COVID? Were you kind of like, oh, well, it's whatever? Or did that spark any concern in you?
Initially, when I looked, I would say, I guess it's kind of any just like any other virus. Because we've had different type of viruses in the past that people had really freaked out about that may have been spreading, but there are different things that may have stopped it, different things that just the government didn't say was such a big risk. So when COVID came about, I was thinking that would pretty much happen the same way. But no, it did not. That really took over. Oof.
Yeah. So, once it really became a pandemic and it affected your job, how did it affect your job? What happened to initially cause that?
Well, I remember March 20th, 2022. That was the day that it really hit. That was the day that we became in a state of emergency. So at that time is when schools had decided, all right, all students, we're going to stay home indefinitely, honestly, until everything got back to normal, until something changed. So from there, we've been going online for the rest of that year and on into that next academic year, still virtual. And it was such a huge thing for all of us to try to navigate and figure out. We now have to have laptops. We now have to have access to internet. All students now had to make sure they have that from home. So it was a rush to really set up all of this and try to get this set up so we can go back to our instruction. So fortunately, I did already have an iPad. I did already have a laptop. So I was somewhat familiar with using some of these equipment technologies and all that. I knew a little bit about it. But when it comes to using Zoom, now Zoom, that was something to have to learn. That was a learning curve. Students and staff together had to learn how to use Zoom for instruction.
Yeah, a huge change, I can imagine. So, you mentioned earlier that you have a PowerPoint to share with us. Would you like to go ahead and share that?
Yes, I do, definitely. Share my screen. All right, so now let me talk a little bit more about teaching via Zoom. And how did me and our schools, how did we go along with this process of going from in-person to Zoom and how education happened through this time? How to use Zoom for instruction, that process, it really impacted both the faculty, staff, and the students. Prior to COVID and post-COVID, it still has its effects. So this is a quote that I like. It says, "The world has stopped still, yet we can feel our frenzied, uncertain energy spinning the earth." So what that does is, you can really put in perspective how the world really shut down. Everything had just stopped. And to just see how all the students are now remote, they're staying home and doing virtual instruction. It just felt like everything just stopped. Doors are closed when it comes to restaurants. You can't see anybody out in businesses. It was such a huge change and a huge impact on everyone. That's what I'm saying. It just felt like the world just froze. So what did that mean for us? I mean, I was thinking, what did that mean for education, for our students? So I already mentioned that students were learning virtually. They were at home. And it was a huge learning curve for everyone because students still had to, I guess, show up, so to speak, but in a virtual environment. I know me, myself, when I was a student back in, let's say, when I was 16 years old, we never had school from home. We never did. School was the place for education. So we would have to make sure we go to school. But now, post up during the COVID times where students had to show up in school, but from home, that was just a unique experience that COVID presented for us in that time. And to be able to be cognizant about how it's impacting our families, our health, our friends, just things to be aware of, that whole ordeal, it really had taught us a lot. And we actually had to extend the school year for about 2 weeks just because we needed time to be able to figure out how to use these tools, how to use social media, just different resources we had available to still give the education to the students. Fortunately, some students were already familiar with how to use technology, so that was something that did help, but the learning curve for Zoom still was apparent, and we had to learn how to learn from home. And we had to make sure that everyone was connected to the internet, even the students who may have not been able to afford it at all. So if a student was not able to afford the internet, we had to make sure we give them a way to have Wi-Fi in their home so they can still be able to attend school. So again, another learning curve for everyone.
Wow, incredible.
Mhm. So now in this virtual teaching environment, wow, it was very, very impactful. So impactful is because during COVID, students would go on and log on to the classroom. Now, would that be 100% effective? We would have to figure it out. We had to make sure Zoom was working. For the middle school, elementary students also had to learn virtually. So that was a huge curve. But was it always a requirement for everyone? It was not. And it wasn't a requirement just because we cannot require everyone show up, so to speak, to class virtually, but they're at home. Some people just did not have the access to that. Some students didn't have access to the educational material they needed to be able to learn from home. So that was really just a fiasco of a process to be able to negotiate, that we had to make sure we do that and still learn. And this affected all students in the US, really around the world, honestly. So with these gaps and these new obstacles coming about when it's coming to learning from home, what that did was that impacted a lot of students' grades. And it was hard for teachers to grade appropriately because students are missing a lot. Students are just substantially behind now because of the times. And what that does is adds pressure, it adds stress onto the students, onto their parents, for them to be able to figure this out. It adds stress for parents when it comes to child care. Are the parents going to leave the students at home alone? Or there's so many things, so many factors that impacted the students, which really impacted their grades. So at that time, it was pertinent for teachers to be flexible with grading. If you are an A student and you were still being an A student through this time, great. We were happy for that. But we knew that wasn't able to happen for everybody. And those are just a couple of factors that impacted that. And it was especially was impactful for students who just were not able to access the resources needed to be able to do remote learning. The connectivity from the, so to speak, low success students was just very, very hard for us to really get them connected to the school. But Wi-Fi was able to be provided. It just was a struggle to be able to give it to every student because we had to make sure that they had that before we continued with class. And then also with students, they have a lot of things going on simultaneously. And it became burdensome for everyone. It became burdensome for teachers, for students, because students now had to worry about school in their house. So they had to worry about the things that they were exposed to. And we as teachers still had to make sure everyone was safe. And safety was our top priority. It wasn't exactly the education at this point. We wanted to make sure that we had a safety plan established for everyone while they're in their homes. If they were in a good conducive environment, okay, that's fine. But there's so many different things that COVID had impacted, especially when it comes to the parents. And the ones that who had a job, it may have been hard for them to continue because jobs may have laid them off. So now it's a lot of different factors that we are trying to prioritize for the students and their families to continue the student learning. And the last thing on the list I want to say is the lack of control during instruction. So that lack of control was because there is no exact set environment. What happens are students typically would wait in the hallway, wait for the teacher to open the door, and then that was the environment in the classroom. There was no structured environment. Students knew in schools, they knew to listen for the bell. They knew to have a lesson at this time, have a review at this time, maybe an exit ticket. We had a system in place with the students. And that same system went along with the other classrooms alike. That was what we had for our controlled environment. But now we're at the home office, the home environment for people. That environment just is not conducive. So what it happens is now students are amongst their peers. They aren't amongst us teachers, but we're still having school. So what happened is when class was over, students would just turn off their camera, or when there was a break, they would just turn off the camera, maybe talk to other friends. They could now be open to texting more just because it was easy to just turn off the camera and just go about their business. So as a teacher, what do you do if a student just turns off their camera in your face? Well, there's not really much we can do. We can tell them, hey, make sure you're staying in class the whole time. Keep the camera on. You don't want to miss any work. We can, but we're not really in control of that. So you can see how it becomes more of a student responsibility now. So us teachers now had to rely more on the parents to ask them, can they support in making sure that the student is active in their learning? And again, the educational aspect wasn't the priority, but it was really meant for us to have the parents support them while they're at home. This quote we can read says the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated a lot of problems facing public schools, but it didn't create most of them. Most of the inequities existed long before the pandemic. The only difference is who was affected and who was paying attention, end quote. So that quote, it was really impactful for me, just because we know all deaf and hard of hearing students at this time at homes were already struggling, and now the more traditional ways for education has changed, and that's impactful too. So for a full week, the schools for the deaf, the residential schools on the weekend, what would happen is those students would go home, but now that they are at home full time, a lot of access to language just wasn't there. It was normally only on the weekend when they may be able to go home, and then during the week they could come here and sign and really feel that they're in tune with their language. But now we're COVID times. We're at home 100%. Not all the homes had access to sign language, so communication was not there for every student, and that could take a huge mental toll on the students for that. That is just one big example. And it really makes me think of our deaf and hard of hearing students when it comes to language acquisition and the other factors that could have impacted their learning while they're at home. That's double, triple, quadruple the stress that the students are dealing with. Also, students and teachers became more fatigued just because they're staring at the screen the whole time. They're staring at the screen. I know, especially for me, in my personal experience, all day I'm teaching, lecturing via Zoom. One class is done, I log out, log into another class link. It took a major toll, and all I'm doing the whole day is staring at this 8x8 screen. And it takes a toll on students and teachers alike. So what that was coined is Zoom fatigued was the term. Also, in person, students were easily able to go to the teachers and ask for help, assistance for whatever they need. But in this time during the pandemic, that isn't exactly available. Students do have the option to email, request maybe their own personal appointment. That is able to happen, but it was not always happening, because what happened is now students are encouraged to rely on the tools that the teachers are giving them. So teachers now having to go look up online, find some document to be able to help the students to continue to let them remember versus what they had in person. So that became another frustration, a stressor for teachers, because to be able to effectively teach the deaf and hard of hearing via Zoom, it just wasn't 100% effective for us. For the deaf and hard of hearing population, we rely 100% for in person. Our sign language, our language is impacted and it's changed if we see it virtually versus in person. So what happens is now when we're forced to be in a virtual environment, that sense of human connection is pretty much lost. And that sense of human connection is typically in education, because it's not there, it's just a lot harder to be connected with your students. And that connection is invaluable. And Zoom just makes it harder to be able to establish that. It becomes harder for effectiveness and success for the teachers and the students. Because if a student is not motivated to be attentive during class while they're on Zoom, information is lost. And the expectations that are set up, it's easy to not follow them. And especially if parents and other factors aren't involved, it just gets less and less student activity. So the emotional side, the mental health, the social, every aspect of life was now impacted. I know for myself it was impacted. So to be able to bear and persevere through that, to continue teaching, we had to get used to this new form, this new environment. And just the virtual environment just wasn't conducive to that. I couldn't really touch or reach out and touch anybody. And it became more of a way that I was a little fed up. It became more of a flat style of teaching for me, just kind of going through the motions. Prior to COVID, I was much more engaged. So it became more important for everyone to have their own outlets. And these outlets were so important for everyone to have. Just because of the environment that they were in, that we were all in, it's important to have outlets to be able to play, outlets for gaming, whatever the outlets are. It's important to be able to have it, because during that time, everything was limited. One example, we didn't have sports. After school activities for the students, all nixed because of COVID. So it became more and more of a stressor for everyone. And the energy required to be able to continue through school really was dwindling day by day. Okay, so I'm gonna make sure I spotlight the interpreters. Okay. All right, we can proceed. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is Denton. So really, there were a lot of negatives, obviously, but there were also some positives to teaching during that time. And now Google Classroom is one big component of that. As we see this shift towards digital education, getting that boot camp that COVID gave us really jump started our abilities in that area. We figured out a lot of these little nuances in the platforms that could aid us in our educational purposes. One example, in the way I use Google Classroom, I use it for lesson planning, for homework, prior to kind of our back to the world as we knew it, so to speak. Prior to COVID and things, I knew how to do things a certain way, and I had kind of my routine. And I learned through this, baptism by fire of COVID, how things that really benefited my teaching in the future. One thing was Nearpod, one platform that we used. And Nearpod I used for social studies very often. Social studies itself goes into a lot of analysis, and we look at a lot of documents and documentation in that class, finding out why and how certain things are the way they are or were the way they were. Things prior in social studies, it would be memorization, facts, who, when, where. Those kinds of things were what showed up on tests. But we've changed our approach to that and focused more on analytics and analyzing media and documentation and messaging, really looking at things and finding out different lenses that you can view the world through. So that was one thing that Nearpod really helped me to shift my social studies. And I tell people it's like PowerPoint on steroids. Nearpod allows kind of a connection between myself as the teacher and my platform and the students themselves. So we are able to interface one with another on Nearpod and kind of in real time analyze together the lesson and the documentation that we're looking at. So that was one positive. Another is the students kind of became more aware of how to use internet to accomplish their goals and to work on things, specifically for educational purposes, obviously. One skill that we worked on was research. And how crucial that is in our day and age. And we became really learning focused on that, teaching how to teach yourself, how to actually do the learning on your own instead of it being kind of fed to you. So my requirements for the things that I had to force teach went down considerably because I taught the students how to teach themselves and to teach each other. And I think that was one of the greatest advantages, and being able to, I know now kids can say, hey, I know how to use TikTok to edit my videos and to explain or describe a certain aspect of my life. I know how to use my phone and make these clips and make, things for entertainment or information. Kids are so well versed in technology. It's incredible. So why not take advantage of that? Why not use our ability to use the internet to further their future? They are natives of technology, and so we can use that to prolong their success in life afterwards. Should I keep going? Are we good? Okay, just checking in now. So when COVID was done, how I feel like it impacted the world, I think there were some gaps in learning and education. Those at least a year or two, I feel like we lost a lot of ground because of the inability to be attending in school in person. Students were more focused on other things. Students kind of lost importance of education without that separation of education and home that they previously had. It kind of shifted focus, and that was really difficult, and that lost about a year, I would say. It really, I think, increased the need for emotional, social resources and support. After COVID, because we had kind of that time of the world shutting down, students were not able to pick up on certain social learning environments that you only get when you are socially and emotionally connected in person to one another. So some of those skills related to coping, self-regulation, self-responsibility, a lot of those soft skills went away during COVID. And I think I see that as a serious need going forward, that our students need our support, more so even than academics, I think. So with all of that, it was a huge impact, absolutely. COVID had an unchangeable impact on the world. But as we go back to quote unquote normal here, really looking at the White House statistics in the fall of 2023, average attendance was at 90%, which is the lowest in decades. So to give a little bit of context, let me back up a little bit here. In general, each state has a specific school day a number of days that they can miss of a number of days a student can miss of school before they become truant. So each state has a statute about that because they have these lines where anything beyond this line will affect their ability to learn and get an education. You are allowed 10 days. 10 out of, what is it, 180-ish, somewhere in that window. So when you compare 10 days of missing, that's to 180 days, that's about 10% of school that you miss, which is easy. It's so easy to go over those 10 days. So it's a huge struggle, and it impacts our learning and from the teacher's perspective, the ability to teach students. And another thing we notice is an attitude change, a change from the students and the parents and how they view education, which also links to staff and staff burnout when it comes to things like this. Staff burnout, like I talked about that Zoom fatigue earlier, it led to a huge burnout, which led to a massive exit from education as a job. Career-wise, and so that impacted the deaf schools as well as all of public schools. So with that, we're missing staffing. We are missing teachers, and we are struggling to replace them with qualified teachers. And deaf schools especially are looking for those qualified teachers to have the literacy that we need. We have a certain, a paraprofessional kind of, which is an assistant to the education process, covering whole classes as a teacher, which impacts the students, as that person has not received adequate training to be a teacher. Like I said previously, student attention spans have drastically lowered because of that screen time. So, when you're staring at a screen all day long, you just kind of go into this zombie state and you drift away mentally very quickly. You get distracted by the smallest thing, your phone in particular. Students today, they say the average attention span is about 2 minutes or under, because they're used to paying attention to a screen and then they flip to something else and then they flip to something else. And particularly during COVID, people relied on screens heavily. So that has in turn affected the classroom. So we as teachers have to adjust how we engage with students to continue their involvement in the learning process. Low-income families and students, obviously, they were much more affected during COVID because a lot of them couldn't afford to protect themselves. And that impacts the family, when one person gets COVID, when someone in their family is hospitalized, or they lose a family member due to COVID. That has a huge impact on their ability to be involved in their own education. So low-income students and higher-income students definitely had a different impact, and we were able to see that whether or not a student had access to the internet in the home, whether or not the family were able to prioritize education, the support, whether their family was able to support them in their education from home, was a huge impact. Some positives that I would say is self-sufficiency and autonomy for the students. That's what I've seen as one big positive. Students don't want to wait for a teacher to help them find it. They're like, no, I'll just do it on my own, and they figure it out. They're more inclined to have the tenacity to figure it out on their own rather than go to someone else for help. So that self-dependency, that self-sufficiency, I see a lot more widespread, particularly with the advance of AI. As we see AI advance, I personally think it's kind of the way of the future. But AI is going to affect education for the rest of time, I think. As we look at things like ChatGPT, and ChatGPT can be a huge support for students when they have questions about something that they're curious about. They can ask ChatGPT to help them, and it can really lead to more learning and more awareness and it broadens the horizon of voices you can hear from instead of just from the one same teacher all the time. Staff and students, but especially staff, being more internet savvy. Staff really learning all of the different options and abilities that, particularly for older staff, were maybe unaware of prior to COVID. You can use Zoom to connect with another person. How does a Google Doc work? How do you use even PowerPoint? It's possible that an older teacher is going to be relying on pen and paper and those older documents for most of their career, and then COVID forced them into a switch, and now they can see all of the different options that they have. So more knowledge, more savvy, more ability on the part of staff and faculty leads to the students having more access. And again, the internet is a more diverse space for the students. And again, this quote here that I love, the hope that once we get through this future years will be a piece of cake in comparison. And I just feel like that is true, and we will support each other through the future.
This is Amanda speaking. Wow, how much I've taken from this, what you've went through, the teachers with experience, with students with experience, parents, the at-home environment. You're right. It's been such a big shift than the standard routine we've been used to because we can't go to school. So during that time, to knowing that, as you say, the students are used to going into the class, seeing the teachers, greeting them, to now everything's at home and everything's mixed up. It's like chaos. It's just, and just to be able to do that, wow. I honestly cannot even imagine myself. Ooh, that was such an experience. So thank you so much. Thank you for just bearing through that tough time. I cannot just be amazed enough. Honestly, again, wow. And to knowing how we had to do that digital learning. How did everybody do that?
We were on it for a year and a half.
A year and a half at home.
Yeah.
Even not socializing with anyone in person for a year?
No, some students who commuted to the school were able to come in for hybrid instruction during that last half of the year. So we were able to do a little bit of hybrid, but we are a residential school, so there was no one living in the dorms at the time. Hybrid was just not very successful either. It was incredibly difficult to teach both the in-person students and the students virtually. The pacing was challenging.
Yes, a year and a half. And when you seen the students coming back in person, did you see their personalities and attitude change, or was it the same prior to COVID versus post-COVID?
I would say, in general, prior to COVID, the students were a little bit more aware of the routine. I think, were a little bit more respectful, more aware of boundaries, what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. After COVID, I really feel like they don't have a filter really anymore. Staying at home, they got used to just kind of, being with family, not having some of those other boundaries. So, the way you behave at home and the way you behave at school used to be much different. But now that they've been at home for over a year, being able to go back to those different boundaries and picking up those skills, to be able to separate home and school, we have to kind of readjust our routine to show those differences and split that a little bit more.
Incredible. To really be able to need to unplug from that environment.
Yes, absolutely. We are still disengaging students from that mindset and trying to get them back into more of a school routine. However, there is also that possible increased exposure has become a big change for after COVID. So we're monitoring a lot more social media in person than we used to be.
Social media. Yes, that's always a hot topic. I know that you were on a Netflix show called Queer Eye, season 8, episode 4, I believe. Yes. And so I just wanted to know, you going to Louisiana School for the Deaf, being there, the Falcons, yeah, the Eagles, excuse me, yes. So
Warren Eagles.
yeah, so tell me about that. How did that process look like?
Well, really, that was filmed in summer of 2022. And that summer, we were getting ready for the first year of fully back to school teaching post COVID. So Dr. Natalie Delgado, she felt that she wanted to kind of jumpstart the academic school year, kind of kick things off on a positive note,
Okay,
So,
obviously.
yeah, so she found out that the Queer Eye crew were going to be in New Orleans, and she kind of got the idea to go ahead and make a nomination. She asked me if she could nominate me, and at first I had no idea what she was talking about. What is Queer Eye? I had seen the name before, but had no connection to it whatsoever. So I watched an episode. They were in Austin during that episode, the season that they did in Austin. And I was like, you want me to do something like that? I don't know. So I decided to kind of open myself up and say, all right, well, they're not going to pick me, so it'll be fine. Shows me. They did pick me. So one person that I met with was Karomo, and he really wanted to put a deaf hero on the show. So that kind of initiative came from them. And I was involved in a few interviews, and I just kind of went along with the process. The experience was really a lot of fun. It was really great. It was fun to see kind of behind the scenes challenges and how the Fab Five interacts in person, how to work with the camera crew, the Netflix staff. It was a really cool process to watch it all work out.
Wow. And I can just imagine how much of a boost this was for you and your school through that.
Mhm.
Just to know, to see you guys' mindset and attitude, how that positivity has spread. So after editing, what it was just released, what?
Yes, January of 2024.
Right. So to be able to go through that and for you to see the finished product, I know that was proud for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it was. And I remember, I think it was football. It might have been maybe one of the last games you were able to film something. How did it feel? Was that stressful for you all, or were you scared? Tell me about it.
Well, I think for me, I kind of was a little bit more, I don't know, I was a little bit more used to it. Um, so I just kind of did my regular coaching thing, but I've got camera kind of over here. And I can remember thinking to myself, like, okay, that's enough filming. What kind of interrupted my process. But it was a really cool experiences for the kids. You know, they were like, ooh, we're on ESPN.
Love it.
So they kind of feel like they swagged up.
Mm.
They got all their good gear on and they wanted to look all cool. Um, so we were facing Florida, and it was a tough game. It was tough, but in general, it was a really fun experience for all of us. It was nice. The kids really look back on that experience positively. They have some great memories from that. And looking at it now, I was like, oh wow, that's what those kids look like. Just even that short ago, these kids grow up fast. You know, I see these kids with these little baby faces, and now I see them and they've got their piercings and their hair growing in, and they're like, oh, so much older now.
I know.
But yeah, it just puts it all in perspective.
Yes. Well, now you have that experience through Netflix. So hopefully now more people are just more aware and being able to go back to in-person full time now. So maybe sports will be reinstated again. Maybe we can, those after school activities can come back. Hopefully that whole 9 yards.
Oh yes, absolutely. I've got even more motivation for after school things like sports. New uniforms and the volleyball team and the basketball team, men's and women's. We're looking forward to next year. We're gonna use some of those new uniforms we got on our track team.
Hmm.
So we got our pool fixed up that we had. We got a new gym floor, and so we've got a lot of things that are kind of getting the ball rolling and having that snowball effect.
I can imagine. I can imagine that. I can just imagine you all feeling like you put your school and the team on the right track to just
Mhm.
spearhead it forward. As I'm not concerned at all. I know you guys have the spirit, you have it. And I know that this podcast, I really hope that this inspires other people in your situation or not. I just hope it allows people to be able to come together more and be able to just see maybe if there are some struggles when it comes to funding. Hopefully, things like this can just be able to provide more light so schools can get the support that they need. And just schools are now able to see a different way how to come together, how to make things happen when we're coming back to normal for everyone and people in the deaf world. So we can be empowered to know that we need to come together for that unity, especially in a time that's today.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I absolutely agree. And I want the deaf schools across America to really come together. We're all in the same boat. When one deaf school wins, all deaf schools win.
Definitely. I support that.
It's a game for one is a game for all. And when we see someone else succeed, that can inspire us to really get involved with our own schools.
What one person or one school, once they open a door, that's it for all of us. So now that door is open, it shows that, hey, you all, we can. And hopefully that makes us that. Go ahead.
Yes, and then everybody's paying attention. Roseville School for the Deaf won that state championship in California.
Yes.
So they're seeing, oh, state championship. Oh, this guy on Netflix. Oh, really? Deaf schools and the deaf community are being more and more noticed by the mainstream world, and so a lot more hearing people are becoming aware of deaf schools.
And that is the hope. That is the hope for us to be able to have that, just for just a better future for everyone, parents, kids, everyone involved.
Yeah.
And now I think we're pretty much to our end of our 1 hour talk. I want to definitely thank you so much for your time. I learned immensely from this podcast. Just thank you all, teachers, staff, all over in the educational system. My hat's off to you, knowing you had to go through that tough environment of Zoom and you were still able to keep supporting our students through their additional stressors that they had to go through. And that you're able to do that and still maintain that relationship while not in person without that structured environment you talked about, Denton. If I had 2 hats, I would tip both of them to you. So just thank you for that. And we really am keeping going for the goal of education.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been wonderful.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. And thank you, both of our interpreters. Thank you all so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, interpreters. Thank you.
Yes, you all have a good rest of your evening.